Hey y'all, welcome back to Dots and Beyond. My name is Beth. Today we are going to update my reading journal for the books that I read in February, and we are going to get ready for March with our March Edgar Allan Poe pick. If you are new here, this is my reading journal with this great emblem on the front of it where I am doing 12 months of reading of Edgar Allan Poe along with the other books that I am reading. This is just a really quick video where I update my journal for what I read in February and then get ready for March as well. Along with my Poe theme, this is what we have going on. We are going to go ahead and jump to almost February. We're going to go ahead and stop here really quickly at the end of January. Last time when we did a January wrap up, I had a couple of days left before finishing Babel, and I did finish that in that time frame. And in those last few bits of Babel, I changed my rating from a 4.5 to a full-on 5 stars. I love this book. I love the way it addresses colonialism. I love the way that it's academically written. That just really speaks to my heart as someone with an English literature degree. It's almost like being back at university again. I don't know. So I do, those books that I super love, I make these little sort of collage-y things just to represent some of the imagery and stuff from the book. The others, I don't necessarily do that, but I did give Babel 5 stars, and I did finish it before the end of February. Jumping into February, and our February Poe pick was The Telltale Heart. We'll talk about that more in a minute. And then here's just the other books that I've been reading, as well as my little daily sort of reading chart. And today is the 27th, so I do need to check off the 26th. I have, like I said at the end of last month, been reading every day, and thank God for audiobooks, because February was one of those months where reading a physical book was a difficulty. And like Babel, I'm still working on the one that I'm working on. Everything else I read was via audio, so we're going to go ahead and look at those now. And then we'll come back and talk about The Telltale Heart while I'm setting up for March. I read The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. And, I'm not a booktuber. I don't go into all of the details of all of my books. Although if you guys want me to start dipping my toe into booktube, I have a lot of thoughts. As somebody who did study literature in school, I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of books and things that I read. The 10,000 Doors of January, I don't even know really why I picked it up, other than maybe the cover is just stunningly beautiful. I adore this book. This book tells the tale of, it tells two tales sort of side by side. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out where those tales are going to converge, but our main character, January, finds a door, and like she says in the opening words of the book, that maybe she should capitalize that word door, because it's not your garden variety leading to a closet or the kitchen kind of door. It is a door that leads to another world, another dimension. And again, this is another one of those books that tackles the subject of colonialism. It tackles the subject of racism, white privilege, all of those things, and it does it beautifully and still in the historical context of the time that it is set, which I appreciate authors who are gifted. Probably still have a little bit of an edge. I don't know if y'all noticed on that Babel one, I did end up putting a piece of washi tape along the edge just to clean it up a little. I don't know if I'll do that here. But I really appreciate authors that are adept at addressing those topics in books and doing it well. And anyway, as you can see, I also gave this book 5 stars. I read it and then immediately jumped into Alex E. Harrow's next book, which is Once and Future Witches. That one is a couple spreads away, but we'll get to that one as well. Didn't love it as much as I love 10,000 Doors of January. Now, I am very guilty of being mildly critical of books that are overwritten and flowery and maybe use too many words. That is definitively the case with 10,000 Doors of January. It is lyrical, almost to the point of music. And I don't know if y'all can hear. If you watched my last video, Faramir just jumped up on the desk and got in my way. Right now, he's just hollering at me. It is lyrical, almost to the point of sounding like music. It is so beautifully written. Alexi Harrow is definitively a wordsmith. But if you don't like the flowy language, maybe this is not going to be the book for you. Obviously, I was in the mood for it. And I love this book so much that the next time I was in Barnes & Noble, I've also picked up a hard copy. Because I had to have it. I don't feel that way about Once and Future Witches. I liked it. In fact, I loved it, but I didn't love it like I love the 10,000 Doors of January. That was the first thing that I read in February, other than finishing Babel right there at the end of January. The book that I am working on still, because it's a physical book, is Someday Maybe, and I got this in Book of the Month at the end of last year. I don't know if you can see this note up here. It's a book about grief. It's a book about a lot of other things too, but I guess primarily it is a book about grief. That is one of those things that I am in counseling for, or finally sought out counseling for, not just because I live with bipolar disorder, but there were things that I wanted to deal with. And one of those things was grief. So in addition to this being a physical book, and I started taking it to work with me, hoping that I would actually take lunch breaks and maybe read this book on my lunch break. But I'm not done yet. I am slowly working my way through it. It has been slow. I've tabbed a lot in it. It's one of those books that's definitely making me think about a lot of things more than just grief. This one's also tackling racism and different socioeconomic statuses and what that does for you growing up and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot in it. It's not a long book. Hopefully I can finish it tonight or tomorrow and actually wrap it up in February. But I've gone ahead and stuck it in here, obviously. I'm starting to write down some of my favorite quotes, but I haven't put in like my personal thoughts, which will go over here, and I've not yet rated it because I'm not quite done yet. And like I said, everything else that I did was on audiobook. And that's just the beauty of audiobook when you are super busy and you can let your body do one thing and your mind do another, is that you can listen to audiobooks or podcasts. And for me, it used to just always be music. I have like the highest listening hours of anybody on Spotify that I know. And this year I've just chosen to channel a lot of that listening time into audiobooks so that I can read more. And thus far, January and February, I am feeling more fulfilled in building back my reading habit, even if I have to do it with my ears. So that's where we're at. So Once and Future Witches, a story of three sisters, three witches, the maiden, the mother, and the crone in New Salem, at the turn of the century. It's written at the time of suffragette movement and all of that. I really kind of love the magic system in this book. The thing that really appealed to me is that as witchcraft is having its resurgence from Old Salem with the burning of the witches and whatnot, and then now in New Salem, is the discovery that the witches had been passing down their knowledge, passing down their spells through folk tales and songs, and all of these things are interlaced. So the story of Hansel and Gretel, the story of, Cinderella, all of these things have little bits of the witchcraft interlaced through it. And isn't that exactly how we would have passed that down? I just think it's a phenomenal concept. It is written in a way that sounds appropriate to the time period at the turn of the century, or the turn of the 20th century, so the late 1800s, but it still sounds modern as well. So again, going back to Alexi Harrow, talking about her being a wordsmith, this is nowhere near as flowery as the 10,000 Doors of January, but it's still just beautifully written. Her writing is just stunning. And so I gave this 4 stars. Still loved it, but it just isn't up there with my all-time favorite books. And then moving on, And why I felt like I needed to start another series is beyond me. I'm gonna blame, I don't know what I'm gonna blame. Moods. I'm such a mood reader, and I just pick up whatever I feel compelled to. And I guess coming off of Once and Future Witches, I was feeling the magic, and so I jumped into V.E. Schwab's A Darker Shade of Magic, which is the first of a trilogy. What I have written up here is 1, I love a book set in London. It's always gonna get me. And 2, I love a book set in multiple different Londons. And that is also true. One of my favorite light reads, so to speak, is the Invisible Library series that has multiple dimensions and we get to see multiple Londons. I don't know. I am drawn to London. Maybe it's because I was raised in colonial Kenya. I don't know. Again, my degree is in English literature. American lit, I really have to work to love. But English lit, the old stuff, the new stuff. If it's English, I'm pretty much there. Definitively an Anglophile. Darkest Shade of Magic, I gave 3.5 stars because I think, having read this now, it's an excellent standalone. This would just be a great single book. Not that there's not more I want to know about all of these Londons. We have Grey London, White London, Red London, and Black London, and the magic system, because I do. One of the most fascinating things about this book is that our main character, Kel, has this coat that every time he takes it off and turns it inside out, it's a different coat, and like he even loses things in all of the different variations of this coat that he wears. I want to know more about that. I want to know where it came from. Darker Shade of Magic could have been a standalone, and I don't know enough about the series. Maybe I should go read some reviews or whatnot. I'm worried about the second book having that trilogy lull and not really needing to be there, just kind of being a whole lot of filler between book 1 and book 3. Am I immediately going to jump into book 2? No, but I did add it to my series tracker because I've started it. So we've added this to the series tracker. 3.5 stars, definitely readable. Definitely a good book. But again, just hovering on that. Could we have just done with one book instead of a whole trilogy there? And then last night, I actually just finished on audio again, Palace of Illusions by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. Growing up in Kenya, there was a very large Indian population in Kenya because the British had relocated them to build the railroad. Again, I have lots of thoughts on that colonialism aspect of things, but I also wouldn't give up the Indian friends that I grew up with for anything because I love those individuals, and if they hadn't gotten plunked there and I hadn't gotten plunked there, we would never have known one another. Doesn't excuse it. But so I love Indian food is my favorite. I love Indian culture. I don't know enough about it. And Palace of Illusions dives deep. It is a reimagining of the Indian epic, the Mahabharata, and I might not have said that correctly. I probably didn't. And just the amount of folklore that I learned in the reading of this book in just a stunning, beautiful way, with this radical, fiery feminist of a narrator in a culture designed to sort of squash her independence. I gave it 4.5 stars basically because of the immersion into the culture. It's written beautifully. Love the story. From what I can tell, and I have not read the original epic, but from what I can tell and looking at other reviews and that sort of thing, it sticks very faithfully to that tale while still having the feminist bent and yet not deviating from that cultural story. So that takes a gift of a writer to do that. It's someone who has to love that epic and love its characters in order to bring it to life in a retelling. I gave this 4.5 stars. Is it perfect? No, but the immersion into the culture, I just couldn't not. This has been a much better reading month than January. While I gave Babel 5 stars, if you go back and watch my January reading wrap up, you can tell I didn't have a great start to January. I was not picking the greatest of books in January, but February was a great reading month. Even if it was on audio and I was in my car or I was working on a spreadsheet or any of the things that I had to be doing. I listen a lot before I go to bed. It's one of those things that I do to wind myself down, so I kind of unplug from the devices, other than the fact that my phone is, playing this, but I don't have the screen on and I'm just listening, and just to kind of wind myself down before going to bed. And so that's where I've been getting my reading in, is in the car while I'm working on other things, and then right before going to bed. So let's go ahead and set up for chapter 3, which is March. And this is going to look very similar to January's and February's. Go ahead and get out this stencil and go this direction. While I'm doing this, let's talk about our February Poe pick, which was the Telltale Heart. You know, when I started off with this reading journal set up and said I'm going to read Poe this year, I had no intention of other people jumping on the bandwagon with me. Not that I'm not happy to have you. It was very much, I guess, a surprise that anybody else would go, oh, well, hey, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. It's been interesting to have other people's thoughts in the comments on our Poe picks. And of course, it's Edgar Allan Poe. And again, we're going to call him damaged. Poe was an alcoholic for a while. Eventually he became a teetotaler. He had a substance abuse problem with alcohol before he went dry. He clearly has a twisted mind, but he's also a man. A man from the turn of the century. Definitely has some chauvinistic viewpoints, some misogyny in there. I'm not excusing it, but there are reasons for it and the time period in which he lived. Much like our first narrator when we read The Black Cat in January, our narrator in The Telltale Heart is also completely unreliable. You know, he starts off telling us, you know, why do you think I'm mad? It's like, well, you murdered a man. And, you know, at the end of The Telltale Heart, he confesses to police that he has killed this man and dismembered him and buried him in the floorboards. And I can't help but think, well, and first of all, I'm saying he, because most of Poe's protagonists are male. But actually, in The Telltale Heart, we're never explicitly told that this person is of the male persuasion. So that's an assumption we pretty much all make, I think. He has confessed to this terrible thing that he has done. And I can't help but think that as the story begins, it's retroactive. It's almost as though he's maybe in custody talking to the investigators after they've arrested him and found the body parts that are buried in his floorboards, that he says, listen to my whole tale. So he's confessed, and maybe now he's at the police station or whatever that would have looked like in that time period. I mean, I think we can all watch television shows and guess what maybe police stations look like in that time period. But again, just like our narrator in The Black Cat, who says, I'm perfectly sane. I may drink a lot and I may change my behavior, but I'm sane. So too does our narrator in A Telltale Heart. And I think one of the reasons that I've always been drawn to Poe and his works is because I've liked his works since 6th grade. So we had a teacher in 6th grade that read The Pit and the Pendulum aloud in class. Now, for context, he was reading The Pit and the Pendulum aloud in class to a bunch of children whose parents were missionaries. And there was almost some kind of a revolt. And most of my classmates don't know this until I wrote a little story about it a few months ago, because my mother was the school librarian. They came to her about what this man was reading to their children. You know, started using a librarian's favorite word, the B word, the ban word, and they expected my mom to do something about it as the school librarian. We were overseas. We were in Kenya, and again, my mom is a missionary. My dad was a pastor and a missionary. He was a professor at a seminary that he started from scratch. Really talk about why my parents were there, because I don't necessarily subscribe to why they were in Kenya. But I'll never complain about my upbringing, because my upbringing was just idyllic. I got to meet people from all over the world and go to school with people from all over the world, and I would just never give that up for anything. But the missionary parents came to my mom and wanted her to intervene. They wanted her to say that, this was inappropriate material, and she refused to do it because, conservative or not, she's a librarian, and I've always respected her for that. I knew tales for a long time of parents would go to her and, their kid would have checked out a library book that they didn't approve of, and they would want her to ban it, and she would refuse. And I just think that's just one of the things that I love about my mom, is that, she stood up for free speech, even as this conservative missionary librarian. So that's where my Poe affair started, so to speak, was with The Pit and the Pendulum. And we're just going to call him Mr. D, was our teacher, our 6th grade teacher, who read that to us. And so I've read Poe a lot over the years, and I personally, living with bipolar disorder, am fascinated by mental health in all of its iterations, whether it's from biology or substance abuse or trauma. I just am fascinated by the brain. I was never fascinated enough to want to go to school and study it, because that was science, and I'm fascinated by science, but my brain doesn't like to retain scientific information, so I didn't go into science. So I'm fascinated by the stories that deal with mental health, and here we have another unreliable narrator. Doesn't say anything about drinking, but he does, ask, why do you think I'm mad? I'm perfectly sane. And then he immediately begins to tell us the story of this old man who is his neighbor, who has this eye, and our protagonist is obsessed with this man's evil eye. And he's so obsessed with it that he gets to the point where it has to go away. And in order for it to go away, he has to kill this man to get rid of the eye. And much like our narrator in The Black Cat, who professes to love animals, this narrator professes to care for this old man, this neighbor, but he breaks into his home and stalks him while he's sleeping, and everything's fine and dandy then because he's asleep and the eye's not open, and so the eye can't haunt him because it's not open. But then, of course, one of these times the eye is open, and he kills the man. So you guys need to let me know. I had kind of forgotten little elements of Telltale Heart. It had been so long since I had read it. I did kind of forget about the whole stalking him in the middle of the night sort of situation. And then, of course, what ultimately drives him mad, other neighbors are concerned about the old man, saying they heard him cry out in the night or whatever. And Poe invites in the investigators. Hang on, I'm trying to find my dot marker here. Poe invites in the investigators and tries to act all cool, calm, and collected, and oh, look at me, everything is fine. And then he just loses his shit because he can hear the old man's heart beating and nobody else can hear it. And we're supposed to think he's sane because the investigators don't hear anything. They don't act like they hear anything. And it's really a tale on how guilt can drive you mad, ultimately, I think. But let me know in the comments below. Did you read The Telltale Heart with us in February? Oh, I do know what I want to tell you. I found a YouTube channel, because of course there is a YouTube channel for everything, that is called The Tale Master. T-A-L-E, like the story, not D-A-I-L, like an animal tale. This guy does dramatic readings of short stories that are open source, that are no longer under copyright. And his reading of The Telltale Heart is phenomenal. And I've already checked, and he also has a reading of our March story. And our March story is, it deals with death and burying people in weird places again. We're going to read the Cask of Amontillado. I really thought about putting this one on February because February was Venice Carnivale, and the Cask of Amontillado takes place during Venice Carnivale. March is close enough. I really liked sticking The Telltale Heart on February because of Valentine's Day and it being a gruesome heart story, which tells you a little something about me, but there you go. But we're going to read the Cask of Amontillado. And then going into, I think, April, May, and June, and I'm not going to tell you what they are, but we've got some stories coming up that I've never read before. So I did, in my 12-month Poe plan, choose a wide selection of things that I had read, things that I had not read, all of that, so that we could kind of explore Poe a little more in depth than maybe I had in the past. This is all I do for my dashboard. I have my Cask of Amontillado for the March reading, thoughts that I can put down there. It was published in 1903. It has 2,230 words. Like the other ones, it's a horror short story and it's fiction. And then this is just for me to put in what I'm reading for the month. I used to have this over here in January, and then I actually rekindled my reading habit, which I've been trying to do for about a year. I didn't have enough room over here, so we've stuck it over here. This is my little monthly reading tracker, and then I transition this information to my actual page where I have a 365, oh, there it is, I'm right there, chart. So here we go. And I've just realized I have 29 days on here for February. We need to block off the 29th day. I'm not quite sure that's the same red. It's close enough. So back to the beginning, I have added in Babel. Darker Shade of Magic is here under D. And then Once and Future Witches, Palace of Illusions, Someday Maybe I went ahead and put on here, even though I'm not quite done with it yet. 10,000 Doors of January. So there is our indexes updated. I think I'm up to date here, so I'm at 11 books for the year so far. And I think my goal is 48, so I'm doing better than I thought I was going to do. I had a much loftier goal last year, and then I didn't pick up my reading habit, so I pared it back a little bit for this year. Here's my Read 365. So I have managed to read every day, like I said, even if it was only for 5 or 10 minutes. I've yet to pick up a memoir, so I have a couple of them on the burner. I definitely have I'm Glad My Mom Died. And that's another one that I think I just have to be in the right headspace for. So I have it, I just haven't read it yet. So that is on the to-do. My release radar, I haven't added anything to this. I really haven't gone down the rabbit hole though to see what's coming out this year. I just haven't had time yet. And I just kind of pick up things as they come along. So we'll see if I add anything else to this. My backlist, I've gone ahead and marked off Someday Maybe. Other than that, the only other two were from January, where I had done Leopard at the Door and Postscript, and don't read Leopard at the Door. I'm probably, and again, I'm a mood reader, so we'll see, but I loved Palace of Illusions so much that I'm probably going to jump to Kaikie as soon as I finish Someday Maybe. We'll see. As far as a physical book is concerned, I'm thinking that is the direction that I may go next. So we will see at the end of March what I decided to pick up and read. So this is my FOMO spread. This is books that I write down after watching YouTube videos or something else where I feel like I just have to read it. And the only thing I've added to that is The Writing Retreat by J. Bart, and I bought it like 2 days ago. So Poe picks Black Cat, The Telltale Heart, and for March, the Cask of Amontillado. So there we go. So that's updated. Here is my book haul, and like I said, most of it has been audio, although I did double back and also get a physical copy of the 10,000 Doors of January, and then I just picked up The Writing Retreat by J. Bartz. My February book of the month pick, I went lighter. I got Georgie All Along. Haven't read it. Not going to talk about it yet. I'm still, if I pick up one of these two, it'll be Age of Vice. But I think that's just because I'm deep into Indian culture right now. And that might be the next book of the month pick that I pick up. My series tracker, I still haven't gone through and added some things on here. I really need to go through my bookshelf. I think I have the big ones though, and I added Shades of Magic since I picked up A Darker Shade of Magic. So I've added that and checked that off. I haven't DNF'd anything yet this year. As some of you pointed out, I probably should have DNF'd Leopard at the Door, but I kept reading it for research. It was just one of those things. This will be my favorite spread, and it's not like the favorite book of the month or anything. I think I have only 8 spots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So yeah, 8 to start with. I started a little black mark. I started to write Babel, and I thought, well, wait, I probably should wait before I start filling this in because it's only February. I don't know. Like many people, it was their favorite book of 2022, and since I didn't finish it until 2023, it very well may be my favorite book of 2023. I don't know. We'll see. And then here we are in January. So I guess I do need to... I've lost my tabs. I don't know where I've put my tabs. Ah, they're there. So let us get a March tab. And I always just guess. I never really count the dots to stick this on. So it will go approximately here. Fold that over. And then what we haven't talked about before I go is, if you watched my bullet journal setup, you'll remember that I forgot to leave my space. One of my favorite spreads is to write down the first line of every book that I read. I love first lines, and I forgot to do that, so I started it in the back. So we have, and I have been keeping up with it. So here are first lines. So here are the first lines of all the books that I have read thus far. And of course, I mentioned that one of the most fascinating things about Darker Shade of Magic was our character's coat. And the first line of A Darker Shade of Magic is Kel wore a very peculiar coat. Like I said, that coat is still the most fascinating thing to me. Maybe because it was planted right here in the first lines. So I'm working both ways, and my reading habit has picked up. So this journal might get full this year. I don't know the answer to that. We will see. But that is our setup for March. I will be reading the Cask of Amontillado. I will definitely be listening to it via the Tailmaster here on YouTube, and I will link the Tailmaster's video down in the description box below, along with a link to the text as well if you would prefer to read it. And that is all I have for my reading journal setup. I appreciate you guys waiting for these to come out at the end of the month. Like I said, I'm not diving 100% into book 2 where we talk about synopsises and TBRs and all of that sort of thing, but just keeping me accountable for keeping my reading journal updated and getting all of my thoughts and things into it. So if you liked this video, please go ahead and give it a big thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you in the next one.